Can you get those, the two online, please, on the frame? Yeah. Harun has joined? Huh? Oh, there he is. He's there. So, welcome on behalf of the Working Group on Alternative Strategies and the India International Center to the 10th edition of the State of the Indian Economy. We have a distinguished panel of speakers as every year. We have Professor Parth Sen, the former director and the professor, Delhi School of Economics. Professor Surajit Mazumdar, professor of economics, JNU. Now, both Partha and Surajit have been in the entire journey of 10 years with us. And then there is Professor Siddhartha Mitra, professor of economics at Jadavpur University. He's joining us online. Then Professor Vikas Rawal, professor of economics at JNU. Dr. Zakaria Siddiqui, associate professor, Department of Economics at Jamia Millia. Dr. Pooja Sharma, economist and independent researcher. And Dr. Harun Rasid Khan, the former Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank. He is joining us from Bhubaneswar. And yours truly will be moderating the discussion. This year marks the 32nd anniversary of the working group, which is a civil society initiative that has been working as a catalyst group towards an equitable development paradigm since 1992. Now, since it's the 10th edition, and this is a ritual which we have never done before, but we would like to honor the speakers with the Angavastram. Now, this Angavastram is made in Salem in Tamil Nadu, and it's called Ganga Jamuna, you know. So it represents the pluralism which we all stand with and stand by. So I would like to begin by honoring Partha. So for Harun and Siddharth, somebody will be coming to Cal, and Harun, when you come to Delhi, we'll honor you. So they are there, huh? We're not missing you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So now Surajit, of course, will be taking up the question, does India's economy and her industrial sector truly show any growth momentum? Partha takes up the macroeconomic policy, and he talks of the response to the lack of industrialization in India. He also briefly discusses the policy of the government, the IPL policy, PLI policy of the government, and the one proposed by Raghuram Rajan. Okay, Siddharth Mitra talks of the human development record of India, especially in comparison to that of other South Asian countries. Vikas takes up agricultural marketing policies, which have been a bone of contention in recent years. And the government recently came up with a draft national policy framework for agricultural marketing. Now, this is the first major policy paper that has been prepared after the repeal of the 2020 farm laws. Okay. Zakaria talks of the reduction of multidimensional poverty and questions whether it is part of the socially progressive India. Pooja takes up the question: despite receiving considerable policy effort, domestic food commodity prices continue to climb. So I would now, without further ado, I missed out Harun. Harun takes up the persistent issues and emerging challenges in financial inclusion and the rural finance ecosystem. Okay, without further ado, we'll request Surajit. Now, there is a little thing which I have to say, that we have to manage the time very well. So it'll be 12 minutes to each. And then at 11 and a half, I'll request you to, that you just 30 seconds more. Okay. So over to Surajit. Thank you.
Thank you, Suhas. So as Suhas mentioned, I have been a regular since 2012. And in all this period, I have been the onset and the prolonging of an industrial crisis in India is what I have been talking about through this period of 12 years now. So what I thought today was that I'll look at the industrial sector. I mean, I won't focus so much on the industrial sector per se, but look at it within a larger context and try and highlight what appear to be a very peculiar trends in India's growth process that are observable if you look at the period since demonetization, introduction of GST, and the availability of PLFS data. So if you look at this period, there are certain peculiar trends that the Indian economy seems to be exhibiting. And if these are indications of India being on a sustained growth path, then Parth, Vikas, Zakaria, and I will probably have to relearn our economics because it seems to defy all normal economic reasoning. Can I have my slides, please? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We haven't got the slides up.
Surajit, you want to return them yourself?
I can get myself. Okay. Yeah. Well, okay. Can you maximize it? Yeah. Okay, so the first slide I want to show you, in this, there are two things that are visible. Firstly, in this period that one is referring to from 2017-18 till 23-24, India's manufacturing sector has done worse than the agricultural sector. Whether you look at, can you make it full screen, please? Yeah. So whether you look at capital formation, whether you look at employment, whether you look at output, Indian agriculture has done supposedly better than manufacturing. And manufacturing has done worse than the economy as a whole. And the second thing that you will notice if you observe these figures is that Indian growth seems to be very labor intensive in character.
By adding a pronunciation.
Relative to the increase in capital stock, the employment growth is extremely impressive. But the peculiarity is that output growth is lagging behind employment growth. That's the peculiarity that you can see in these tables. As far as the industrial sector is concerned, if you leave aside the value-added figures that we get from national accounts, you look at the index of industrial production. This is the story I've been talking about for a long time, which is that the index of industrial production is showing that India's growth rate in terms of volume of industrial production, manufacturing, is below 3.6% average, which is the rate at which India's manufacturing grew from the mid-60s, which was described as the stagnation decade. So the second stagnation decade is more than a decade now that stagnation has taken place. Now, this labor-intensive character of Indian growth seems to be an anomaly, because this period is part of a longer period in which one has seen, because of differential trends in prices of capital goods and food prices, that food prices have risen much faster, capital goods have become relatively cheaper, that actually progressively, even if real wages remain stagnant, the trend is that replacing men with machines seems to be more economical. That is, labor is becoming relatively expensive, even if real wages remain stagnant, because capital goods prices are cheapening, while food prices are driving up the money wages that have to be paid to keep real wages constant. So this would suggest that the growth process should involve actually substitution of labor by capital rather than a labor-intensive growth process. Not surprisingly, therefore, what you get is that the growth in employment that is happening is an employment growth that is entirely in self-employment. So where people have to pay for labor services, that's not where that growth of employment is happening. It is happening entirely in self-employment. And if you look at specifically casual labor, that is something that is, in fact, declining quite sharply. And in absolute terms, there is virtually no growth of casual labor employment. Now, this is what you then get as the picture as far as productivity of labor is concerned. The economy as a whole, manufacturing, services, agriculture, across the board, what you see is stagnation or decline in labor productivity. So average productivity, so employment is growing, output is not keeping pace with that. So labor productivity is either stagnant or declining, and this is happening across the board. This is, again, a very odd kind of growth process where you are getting this trend. And if you look at the earnings from employment of this employment growth that is happening, and you compare that with the trends in prices, you find that all the different categories of earnings have not kept pace with inflation, and therefore real earnings from all this employment have declined. And the greatest contraction has actually happened in that specific category of employment which has grown the most, which is self-employment. Now, the other or second important anomaly I want to draw attention to is got to do with something that seems to have happened in the last year and continues to be affecting our calculations of GDP growth rates in the present. And that is, if you see the inflation rates on the base, which are inherent or implicit in the GDP calculations, we have figures at current prices, we have figures at constant prices. So the difference is the inflation rate. So there's an implicit inflation rate in the GDP calculations. And if you see that implicit inflation rate, okay, it's never equal to the consumer price index inflation rate or the wholesale price index inflation rate. And you can always see that when the CPI and WPI inflation rates diverge, then it has some effect on because of the way real GDP is calculated, it has some effect on the implicit GDP deflators. But you wouldn't have seen till the last year this kind of a dramatic situation where, according to the GDP calculations, the inflation rate in India is virtually zero, 1.3 or 1.4%, depending upon which output measure you are taking. This is the inflation rate implicit in the GDP calculations for 23-24. Now, what is the significance of that? The significance of that is that if you look at the period till last year, there was a clear trend where in the nominal growth of GDP, the price component was increasing in weight and the real growth component was declining. Okay. Since 2016-17, you could see this trend. But last year, you have an 8.2% growth in real GDP and a 1.4% inflation rate. So that particular calculation of the real growth rate is very dependent on what that inflation rate is. If you raise that to 4%, the real growth would drop significantly. So now, if you look at the last year and the first half of this year, for which we now have GDP data, okay. So between 22-23 and 23-24, what you see is there is a fairly sharp decline in the nominal GDP growth rate. But the real growth rate increases because of this inflation, because the rate of inflation impersonated is suddenly very low. The same effects continue in 24-25 if you look at the first half of the year, for which we have data now. Nominal growth of inflation is still in the same range as last year. Real growth is coming now slightly down because that implicit inflation rate has gone up a little, but it is still quite different from the consumer price index inflation rate. Okay, so that means that if these figures are accurate, the Indian economy would be experiencing the exact opposite of stagflation. Stagflation is when you have output growth is limited, but you have high inflation. Here, you're getting the opposite. Growth is supposed to be high and inflation is extremely low. Now, if that was the case, why is the RBI doing this? Which is that if you look at the history of the repo rate, which RBI is supposed to increase when the inflation rate is higher. So it kept going up until 8th of February 23, which is before the financial year 23-24 begins. And since then till date, it has been held at 6.5%. So either it must be the case that Indian growth is not affected by such high real rates of interest. That 6.5 minus 1.4, almost 5% real interest rate does not adversely affect Indian growth. Either that must be the case, or it must be that the growth is actually less and the inflation component is higher, and that is what provides the rationale for keeping the repo rate at such a high level throughout this particular period. So I leave it for you to consider in the background of all the trends in the growth. What is exactly happening in the Indian economy? Labor-intensive growth, no growth in labor productivity, but the opposite of stagflation, the repo rate making no difference, adverse impact on that growth. What exactly is happening? This is certainly not the standard growth trajectory that we learned in economics would be the characteristic of a rapidly growing economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. First of all, for keeping the time, and then flagging that we have to relearn economics now. You know, that's the critical point. Okay. Now we go over to Partha. Partha.
Thank you, Suhas. My slides, please.
Are you going to operate?
No, I can. Just about. Okay, so this is sort of an autobiographical presentation that I thought I understood some macroeconomics, but don't find many people in this country who agree with me. So let me do a quick review of what I think macroeconomics is about. Macroeconomic policy, at least since the Second World War, worldwide has been a Keynesian macroeconomic policy. It is an activist macroeconomic. So if you react to what the economy is doing and you try to stabilize. Okay, so it's not hands off. It's not that the government sets a policy rule and goes off to Disneyland. it's monitoring the economy. Then came Milton Friedman, so around the mid 70s certainly, but at 1960s onwards, he was becoming quite influential. He said, no, the private sector can take care of itself. What the authorities should do is not to introduce noise, okay? So make it rules-based, make it easy for the private sector to decide. And it is how policy is conducted today, including in India, and I'll have reasons to criticize that. So monetary policy rules on monetary aggregates, or now in recent times inflation targeting, which I think is a bit of a disaster. And fiscal balance. So the government should not run deficits, should not sort of make things bad for the markets. So therefore, there should be fiscal balance or close to fiscal balance. Now, one of the things that I want to highlight about this is that this is the received wisdom, but this is very much American received wisdom. So it's based very much on a closed economy. Yeah? In this slide, I flagged the fact that developing economies have some other problems, external constraints, foreign exchange constraints. And that doesn't figure anywhere. Okay, so as I say that Indians have always tried to ignore macroeconomics. So India doesn't love macroeconomics, but economics loves India because we have had policy regime shifts subsequent to a macro crisis. Okay, now in all this, where is the role of a developing economy? It has no role. So if I take the cue from Surajit's presentation. So there's, one of the things that we might be doing is we might be wanting to move labor from agriculture to industry. That's one thing. So, what is nowadays called structural transformation. When I was younger, it used to be called economic development. But yes, I'm relearning a lot of things. It's also you should also, being a developing economy, you should also invest in human capital, in sort of primary education, public health. Macroeconomic policy in India has nothing to say on that. It's all about inflation targeting and balancing the books, okay? And maybe elections. On education, health, you emphasize private expenditure. And, it's not about the current government. It's since in the Indian economy, so-called liberalization. So it's been on for quite a few years. And one of the things that has happened to India, but very surreptitiously, no one ever talks about it. As they say, "Dard aayega dabe paun." So it's the Dutch disease. There have been capital flows which have caused a real appreciation of the exchange rate. I will talk about this later. So basically, it's like, what is the Dutch disease? The Dutch disease is think of Gurgaon. If a lot of capital has gone into construction and things like that, real estate prices have gone up, Gurgaon becomes a very poor place to produce at least labor-intensive commodities. So Indian economy has received large amounts of capital flows till recently, and that's changing. And it has caused a real appreciation. How do I know it has caused a real appreciation? Manifested in large trade deficits. Okay, so India has been priced out of producing labor-intensive commodities. And you can see that, there was a lot of noise about once China vacates labor-intensive production, what would be a natural place for it to move to? India. Has it happened? No. And that we'll come to. So Dutch disease, it's not a disease that the Dutch have. It's something that afflicted the Dutch economy, although they may have other diseases. Okay, so Surajit has talked about some of this. Labor allocation is depending on some definitions, but around 45%. No one would quibble with that in agriculture, and increasing. okay, and increasing before this before the present regime took place. So, deindustrialization has been happening for some time. Uh, Very low productivity. Surajit has talked about this. Now, so therefore, it suggests that if we need to develop, if we need structural transformation, we have to move labor out of agriculture. The question is to where, to what point? Now, Raghuram Rajan went to IIT, and he likes to think that he's the representative agent. Atmavat Sarva Bhuteshu. So he thinks that everyone can do engineering and produce for the foreign markets labor services. Okay, it's a problem that the bulk of your labor force is uneducated, undernourished, and suddenly you want to impose exporting services on this. And the government's response is and the production-linked incentives. And it says, no, we will try and industrialize through giving a jump start to industry. Okay, and it's not much thought has gone into what constitutes a jump start. And if you look at the details of the PLI scheme, it's very much designed by Babus. Huh? So. Okay, so let me look through, go through the PLI schemes, because Raghuram Rajan talks about it, but he has not given any details. He has lauded some of the data processing things that have come to India, but it doesn't have a clear picture. So PLI schemes have, 14 sectors have been selected, 2 lakh crores have been spent. Some sectors, are doing reasonably well. But again, you have to reasonably well relative to the target set for them. And, it's like what your handicap is that will determine how well you are doing. So some of them are mobile phones, food processing, pharmaceuticals, but labor intensive industry, textiles, not doing well at all. And even cutting edge things like advanced chemistry cells, not doing well. But the labor intensive sectors are not only doing badly under the PLI scheme, but their exports have been falling. So, textile exports have been falling. I don't know what the consequence of the Bangladesh troubles will be, but it's true for leather, footwear, apparel, textile exports have been stagnant at about 35 billion for the last 3-4 years. So it's not a very, very rosy scenario. And here, I think the present government is different from the previous governments. I mean, not that there was no crony capitalism under the previous governments, but here I think if you look at the sectors which have been lined up for the production-linked incentives, it doesn't make sense. I mean, if we were doing well in pharmaceuticals, why would you have pharmaceuticals in there? Unless you have a grand vision of exports, it's not clear what the white goods exports, white good production is going to be. And it's not doing well for, textile and apparel. There's also a question of if you are getting into a production chain, then you should actually try and minimize the cost in the upstream activities. So, which something that forms the core of the input of the final product downstream. But I think Adani and Aditya Birla have cornered the artificial threads and things like that. So there is an industrial organization angle to this. So there is some crony capitalism that's happening here, certainly. That's different. Okay, so Suhas is going to turn me into a pumpkin very soon. So, okay, so demand and supply, in the labor market, labor force is bimodal. That there are people who speak English, who are familiar with the international markets. The bulk of the people are uneducated and have very little skills and also physical activities. So to have sophisticated services is not not possible. PLI has no focus. PLI has, some of it is a knee-jerk reaction to China, that surely we will get something which China is forced to give up. And in some sense, mobile phones have proved us right, but only if you look at the export of mobile phones and not the value added in mobile phones. Because if you're getting inputs from abroad, then the total value of exports is not the way to judge. So I have a proposal, but like everything else I've done in my life, it's been shot down by everyone who has heard this. So that you need some, lot of people will say that you should not get in at the labor intensive, low productivity end of industry, because you will get locked in there. And there might be some truth to that. But right now, if you have a large mass of people who are uneducated, and so the only hope for them in industry is labor-intensive industry, which will, without much, where no skills are required, almost no skills, and import substitution will occur because they will produce it cheaply, and some exports. So we will need some real exchange rate adjustment, and that just does not happen. People just don't mention it. So we also need major investment in health and education for the future. This generation, which is here now, is what we call a state variable. There's not much you can do with their education right now, but for the future, if we want to move up, then we need that. So we need some industry and services at the upper end. Educated unemployment is a big problem. People are looking for government jobs, so there is a large supply of them, and that will also help you dovetail the upper end of the production system to international production chains. Okay, so we need to think, as the Americans say, outside the box. Okay, we need to think about exchange rates. We need to think about development. We need to think about structural transformation, and very little of it is mentioned anywhere in macroeconomics. Okay, and this. So I always say that India is located in Asia, but in terms of macroeconomics, it's located in Latin America. We have this open capital accounts with very international taste and international crises. Thank you.
Thank you, Parth. You overshot by 2.5 minutes, but I didn't want to break your thought process, so I didn't intervene. Now, this is, this is taking Surajit's point forward. I mean, one was relearning economics, and now Parth has put it very mildly by saying that we have to rethink, okay, about everything, virtually. Now, I go to Harun now. Harun, are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So over to you, Harun.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so let me start. The slides are there. Yeah. Okay. The next one. Yeah. Next one, please. Yeah. Basically, my talk is focusing on the financial inclusion and one subset of that, rural finance. What are the issues despite the impressive highlights and milestones we have achieved what are the issues still we need to grapple with. Yeah, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. So I just have a quick a background sort of thing. This doesn't need any explanation to audience like this. But only one point I need to add here in terms of the implications of financial inclusion in our development paradigm context is the concept of outer proletariat. This is the concept which was propounded by Kishan Patnaik. Many of you know him as a great socialist thinker, and he incidentally happened to come from my state, and us youngsters used to follow him. What he used to tell that people who are outside the entire production system, if they are brought into the production system, I think it adds a lot of value to the system, both for the proletariat as well as the system. This is something subsequently Prahlad spoke about gold at the bottom of the pyramid. So the other point in terms of financial inclusion, there are different dimensions.
Can you put the audio loud, please?
So I have. Is it better now?
Better.
Is it better?
It is.
Yeah. So the other is that there are markers in terms of the different dimensions of financial inclusion. They're all quite self-explanatory. The only point I want to emphasize is adoption. Whether it's a question of both the demand side and supply side. But from supply side, the importance is whether the financial institutions have really believed that poor banking to the poor is not poor banking. They're really logged into this idea that this makes sense to provide financial services to bottom of the pyramid. And of course, we have the metrics to measure in terms of access, in terms of usage, and in terms of quality. And RBI has come out with some financial inclusion index, which show good amount of progress from 43 to 64 this year March. Next slide, please. As I told, we have quite a few major milestones we have reached. Nowadays, we talk about digital, so both digital and physical. And if you see the physical part, the rural branches have expanded, and the rural banking outlets have also expanded exponentially. The sharp difference between the rural bank branches and rural banking outlets is what is accounted for because of the business correspondents. That means the para bankers who facilitate the outreach of banking to the rural and semi-urban area. And in terms of digital footprints, we're quite a few things. We had talked about JAM so far. Now we are talking about JAMO. Two more dimensions are being added. One is UPI, which is the Unified Payment Interface for transactions, which is in a sense in a quantum jump in terms of transactions using mobile phone and QR code. And the new one is the ULI, Unified Legal Loan Interface. So these five things are in a big way. We are going to change our landscape in terms of financial inclusion is concerned. As we discussed, both physical and digital, both dimensions are getting fully covered. What we call phygital in Indian context. Next one. Other important. Next one, please. So the other important dimension of financial inclusion is, the microfinance piece of it. Microfinance has seen continuous and consistent growth. It had a dip during COVID. Of course, it gets into different crises now and then. And the latest being what has happened, huge over leveraging has happened and portfolio qualities have suffered. And partly because sudden exuberance due to regulatory relaxations allowed by Reserve Bank. Now people are tightening the belt. So I just want to show that both SHG bank linkage program as well as the microfinance led program, they are showing very impressive top line figures. Yeah, we'll go to the next slide. Yeah. But even though we have achieved major milestones, there are areas we need to cover. So one important aspect of this is we have confined financial inclusion in sort of a narrow sense. We have not moved beyond that, and we have not gone for economic inclusion in that sense without any livelihood linkages in a big way. When I talk about livelihood linkages, we're talking about skill, livelihood support systems, so that financial inclusion becomes really meaningful and self-sustaining. And one major metric we saw is this huge number of Jan Dhan accounts, but is it sufficient? Because they're just government transactions, direct benefit transactions, 2, 3, 4 transaction comes in a year to that account. Is it sufficient? Is it making them full service account? Is it suitable for a construction worker? Is it suitable for a street vendor who has to do multiple level of transactions? He has to do multiple time withdrawals, multiple time deposits. Is it helpful in that sense? Is it having linkage with microloans? We have a scheme for overdraft for Jan Dhan account. Has it really happened in a way it should have happened? So the other point is not only this banking transactions, how much you have traveled in the path of Jan Bima or Jan Nivesh. And one area which is coming, as you know, there is sometimes diametrical relationship between financial inclusion and financial stability. So either a large number of accounts being opened also opens Pandora's box in terms of prudence on the part of the service providers, as well as protection of the customers and clients. For example, we have now seen the menace of mule accounts in a big way being used, and you have seen how these accounts were used by country cousins during demonetization. And the other issue is of grievance redressal. Is it not easy for a bottom of the pyramid customers to get his grievances redressed? And many, even people like us, find it difficult to get through the rigmarole of a helpline number for getting a grievance redressed. And of course, financial inclusion, its ability to cope with calamities and natural disaster, we have not really found out an SOP. And when we have seen tremendous achievements in physical and digital infrastructure, but still there are gaps even in the physical footprints, particularly those which are called unbanked rural centers. Still there are areas to be covered in terms of what is defined as a banking service is 4 hours a day, 5 days a week service should be available. In terms of that, in many of the urban rural centers, unbanked rural centers, we find deficit. We move to the next slide. Even though we have expanded and expanding digital financial and digital public infrastructure, there are issues like quality. There are issues of access. For example, even now, internet connectivity in many areas in the rural area is a big issue, and the non-smartphone based transactions are still very difficult. And of course, a question of digital awareness, digital literacy is important, and very critical in the context all of us realize is the security of digital transactions. Because you and I missing 1,000 rupees is not so important, but a poor bottom of the pyramid customer first time entering into a digital financial services, if he loses 1,000 or 2,000 rupees, he loses trust in the system. So whether we are providing that sort of assurance, that sort of trust to him. And in the field of microfinance, which we talked, which is a major plank of our financial inclusion strategy, we have quite a few issues. And the new issues which are coming up is now high client and credit penetration issues. And these are the states where these ratios are increasing. And the latest in the block is Bihar. And if it is surprising, it may sound, but it is out of the top 10 districts where microfinance loans are now topping, out of the top 10, 5 are in Bihar. So I think now that there are issues of overheating. So that is how people are now worried what is going on there and how to mitigate that. And of course, we have the issue of the final cost to the customer because of the high operational and financing cost. It has almost driven almost 17% for the last 5 years, 6.5 to 7% operating cost, around 11% financing cost. And of course, we know portfolio quality keeps on moving up and down, despite top line sometimes showing that we have very high collection ratio, but a lot of evergreening goes under that. And during COVID, particularly, it has come to forefront that this group funding has come down substantially. And of course, there are problems of small microfinance institutions in terms of staff, in terms of technology, and in terms of cost of funds. And the other, of course, in the other major program of SHG bank linkage, we have huge regional disparities, and the bank loan adjusted for loan size adjusted for inflation is still showing low, and there is not much of a focused approach towards a cluster-based approach. And moving from group loan to individual micro enterprise finance still remains an issue. And the whole the gamut of activities in the financial inclusion, we really don't have very meaningful impact evaluation assessment. There have been linear assessments, but not really longitudinal studies. One study is being, of course, now being carried out by Sadhan, which is being done by Indira Gandhi Institute. Hopefully, next 2-3 months it should be out, and we'll look forward to that. Next slide, please. So now coming to the other piece of financial inclusion is the rural and agricultural finance. Here, basically, what I'm trying to talk about is there are multiple dimensions of agricultural credit. One important dimension is what is the institutional mix, institutional part and non-institutional part. Right? The whole approach of rural credit has been that we should be moving more towards institutional formal finance, because money lender, as many of us, those of us who have seen the movie Mother India will remember how the money lender Kanhayalal is exploiting the mother of 2 kids, and that remains etched in our mind. So how it was non-institutional almost 90% in early 50, now of course it has come down, but there are other dimensions in terms of interest rate, in-time availability, and whether the investment credit which is needed for doubling the income, or what we call increasing the income, is important, and what are the instrumentalities of providing agricultural loans. So these are some of the, and inclusivity, which we'll see. So the credit headlines have grown up very substantially. Every year we have overachieved the targets. There is high intensity of agriculture credit. KCC, which is a major instrumentality of giving rural credit, is quite high, but still 56% of the households don't have access. Institutional credit has, of course, gone. Money lenders' dependence has largely come down, but there are other issues as we go forward. Next slide, please. So this has not really, but we find that it has not, the credit has not really directly related to production and productivity. There are apparently leakages, and the whole integrated approach of finance. Finance is one of the important elements, but this is not the only element. So finance is a leading resource, but there are a whole host of other resources they have to coalesce together to give better production and productivity results. So it is ancillary and allied activities which provides a backup income, risk management, because agriculture is highly susceptible to risk. Marketing, as you know, we always know Mandi, Mahajan, and Monsoon. These are the 3 important things for agriculture. So marketing is still an issue, and extension and research support is another key area, and the finance has to be integrated with that. And there are a host of other resources other than finance, whether it is input, whether it's technology. So how do we coalesce them together to get best out of the finance? is still we are trying to find out that. And one major area of risk management in agriculture has been Prime Minister's Fasal Bima Yojana, but there have been a host of issues. In fact, many states have withdrawn from this Fasal Bima Yojana, partly because of claim settlement issues, grievance redressal issues, and certain localized calamities not being covered. Further, there are huge special disparities in credit disbursement. And one of the important inclusivity part is even though small and marginal farmers account for almost 88 to 89% land holdings, they account for 52%, only 52% of the credit. And APOs, Farmer Producer Organization, which basically focuses on small and marginal farmer, has not really scaled up. The next one, please. Yeah, we have issue of less access of credit to women. Some study have indicated only 7%. SC/ST, some study have indicated less than 5%. One of the two major institutional pillars of rural credit has been the regional rural banks and rural cooperative banks, but there are issues of non-performing loans, technology, governance issues, and product offering. So they in fact, once upon a time, they constitute a large chunk. Cooperatives used to constitute more than 50% of the, in fact, 90% at one point of time. Now, cooperatives and RRBs are constituting more 20% or less than that, around 80% by commercial bank. It has implications.
We are running out of time. Can you?
Yeah, it's the last slide. So now the other issue is of credit bring trust on people. And the latest are the fintechs. A lot of unwanted loans are being thrust on people, and it is affecting the credit culture. And the smart agriculture is, as we mentioned, is affected by climate. So climate resilience finance is yet to find traction. The last one, slide please. Next one, please. Yeah. So I will not focus on so much on off-farm sector rural. As you know, the contours of rural economy have changed. Huge reverse migration has happened. But really, we have not seen much of product innovation so far as the non-farm sector is concerned. And possibly it's a time to look at Pura and see what Abdul Kalam had said, whether this can reorient our developmental paradigm and make the off-farm sector and employment quality much more vibrant in the rural area. I will end here. Just to sum up, I have a small diary which I will end as my summary. We have achieved a lot, but a lot of qualitative areas we need to cover. And as they say, मंजिल से आगे बढ़कर मंजिल तलाश कर, मिल जाए तुझको दरिया तो समंदर तलाश कर. Thank you.
Thank you, Harun. Thank you very much. Now I'll request Vikas to come in.
Thank you, Suhas. I have been participating in these discussions now for about 5 years, 6 years. And I have, over the several editions of this event, covered different dimensions of agricultural economy, agrarian crisis, talking about the problem of prices, profitability, incomes, and crisis of input availability, etc. So this time when Suhas asked me to come, I was wondering what do I speak about, but then, well, our government does give us every now and then something to talk about. Before I talk about this particular document, which has been talked about in the media recently, I just want to add to something that Surajit talked about, which was the sort of growth performance of Indian economy. And he pointed out how the inflation numbers seem to be driving the real growth, and there is perhaps an inflation of growth by keeping the implicit inflation down. I think there is another aspect there, which is that I strongly believe that the numbers on agricultural growth are being cooked up. I have mentioned this earlier in this event, but you see, the major agricultural growth today comes from sectors on which we really have no data.
horticulture, livestock, fisheries. Data on production of these subsectors are essentially cooked up in the Krishi Bhavan by somebody. I have worked very hard to try and find the source of data. These are sectors on which we have nothing equivalent of crop cutting surveys, which happen for forecast crops. We have no idea how much milk is being produced by cows and buffaloes in the country. Government claims that states are supposed to be doing something called integrated sample surveys. We have not been able to find data for integrated sample surveys for even a single state, for even a single district. There is no budgetary allocation for that survey. We have not been able to get even a blank questionnaire that is used for doing that survey. So that survey is a complete hoax. We have no idea where milk production data comes from. And that's also the case with horticulture and fisheries. So what we are seeing as growth of, bulk of economic growth numbers that you see are essentially agricultural growth pushing up in a period in which manufacturing sector is down. But if those agricultural growth numbers are fictitious, we don't know what is actually going on. There's another reason why I believe that agricultural growth numbers are really suspect, because even for forecast crops, the agricultural production estimates are uh, released in several rounds. So there are advanced estimates, there are revised estimates, 1, 2, 3, and the final estimates appear when crop cutting surveys are done. But if you look at the data for some of the crops for the recent years, the advanced estimates so accurately predict the final estimates. It makes no difference what's happening to monsoons. It makes no difference whether DAP is available or not. It makes no difference whether urea is available or not. Our guys sitting in Krishi Bhavan know at the starting of the agricultural year what final production figures are going to be. Now, if that's the case, you know where these numbers are coming from. Now, coming to this document that I want to talk about, as you know, in 2020, when the farm laws were brought in, agricultural reform of agricultural marketing was one of the major elements of those farm laws, was extremely contentious, and government was forced to withdraw. Since that happened, there's been essentially a vacuum. We have no idea what the government is thinking about. The promise to make MSP a statutory right to farmers was never honored. But now government has suddenly come up with this document which says National Policy Framework on Agricultural Marketing. And what one wonders, well, there is something interesting happening here. Now, it's interesting in several ways. One, it does not deal with the problems that the farmers have been talking about. So there is no talk of, giving statutory right to MSP. There is no talk of how are you going to ensure remunerative prices to farmers. But it also actually does not lay out any path. It does not identify the problems of agricultural marketing. It does not lay out any path on what you're going to do. In fact, I've been really struck by what this document is. I mean, is it just a poor term paper written by a student? Or is it ChatGPT writing our policy documents now? I mean, I was tempted to say it's perhaps AI, because I will show you why I think it might be AI. The only reason why I think it's perhaps not AI is because the English is so poor. So, I mean, ChatGPT would perhaps write better English. But it's in fact quite remarkable what kind of stuff is written here. The other thing is that the document doesn't tell you anything about what do we need to do to improve agricultural marketing infrastructure. What is the resource requirement for it? Where would those resources come from? Nothing. The document doesn't tell you anything about anything. But what does it do? And I want to give you a few examples. Okay. Now, equipping a, can you not do full screen? And I can perhaps zoom into this document. Can you take it out of full, because then it will become readable. Now you have, there are only 2 paragraphs about APMCs. Okay, APMCs are required to assess and endeavor to create infrastructure and facilities for cleaning, grading, sorting, packaging, and also for food processing in PPP mode in market yard premises itself. Now, that's all it says about what, that's all. Now, you have to figure out what PPP mode means, what is going to be happening. No detail need to be provided. Okay? And look at the other next para. It says, as far as rising food processing sector is concerned, the sector plays a vital role in reducing the wastage of perish. And then it just goes on about food processing sector. The second paragraph has nothing to do with APMCs. It's about food processing sector. It talks about food processing industry, 12.2% share in total employment in organized sector. It's somebody has picked up a document, picked up a section on food processing, stuck it into a section on APMC markets, and there you go. It says nothing about APMCs. Okay, go on. And I have another page there. Look at this. Exemption of market fee on direct sales by farmers, FPOs at processing units, factories. The section says nothing about exemption of market fees. Doubling of processing and export of agricultural commodities has been policy of central government in many states as well. Sustainably improving the level of processing and export is proportionate to improvement of farmers' income. The strategy is bound to create employment. Share of food processing and employment is organized manufacturing sector is 23%. What does it have to do with exemption of market fee? Okay, go on. And you have actually a section on Dadra and Nagar Haveli, Daman and Diu and Lakshadweep, agricultural marketing situation in these union territories. And it says marketing infrastructure is meager. Department of Agriculture looks after only the production work. Meager surplus available sold in weekly markets either by producer himself or by aggregators. Essentially saying there is very poor marketing infrastructure. So what's the conclusion? And in these two UTs, there is no need for any further improvement in agricultural market infrastructure. They actually say that. They have a whole section, bigger than the section on APMCs, on these two UTs, where you're saying that agricultural marketing infrastructure doesn't exist, and then you actually have the audacity to say nothing needs to be done. Now, I don't know who is writing national policy framework on agricultural marketing. This is surreal. This is not bringing back 2020 farm laws or God knows what. This is some babu who's an idiot, who has written a document which has been produced without consulting anybody. We don't know what is the committee that has written it. Who is, well, there is a lead author that is mentioned in the preamble. We have no idea. And this has now been put out for public feedback. Now, if this is the kind of policy making that is going on in this country, God save us. Thank you.
Now we go to Siddhartha Mitra. Siddhartha, are you there? Yeah, go ahead. You have to unmute yourself. Please unmute.
Yes, I've unmuted. Okay. And
Please stick to the time.
yes. So can you, let me just get this. Can you see the slides?
Put the slides on. The slides are there.
No, can you see? I put the presentation on. Can you see it?
No, we can't. What is happening?
Yeah, just let me see.
Should we upload them from here?
No, just give.
Yeah, it's come now. It's come.
It's come. Okay, I think you basically uploaded them from your end. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So next slide, please. Okay, now you see those quotations there. I'm going to talk about basically, the Indian performance in regard to the Human Development Index, okay, and compare it to some South Asian countries. And you see those various quotations there. And basically what it is saying that, the accumulation of wealth is basically an intermediate step, but the final objective is the development of human capabilities and human well-being. Okay. So very often we are stuck in that intermediate step. We just pay attention to the accumulation of wealth, and we don't pay attention to human capabilities and human well-being. That's so next slide. And this is precisely what happened, even in the post-Second World War era. We were basically talking about, growth in per capita income is stuck in the economic growth paradigm. And it was only in the 1960s and the 1970s that there was a shift towards social development. So the basic needs approach was introduced, and it emphasized access to basic education, basic healthcare, food, nutrition, water, and sanitation. And then Amartya Sen came forward and he put forward the capabilities approach, but his critics basically said that he basically added the word being to the basic needs. So he was talking about capabilities being the doings and the beings that promote human well-being. And you can see, such as being well-nourished, being well-educated, traveling, etc. So the the word being was stuck in front of basic needs. Now, human development basically built on the basic needs and capabilities approach, and generated a formulaic approach to the development of human capabilities, to the measurement of the development of human capabilities. Now, next slide. Okay, so the first human development report was introduced in 1990. Okay, and basically it measured human development by combining indicators of life expectancy, educational attainment, and income. Okay, and you can see that the four variables considered were GDP per capita, literacy, combined gross enrollment ratio, and life expectancy at birth. And this resulted in a composite index, which resulted in a value between 0 and 1. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going into a bit more detail about the modern measurement of the Human Development Index. So this is based on 3 dimensions with 4 indicators. Okay, so the first dimension is a long and healthy life, and is based on 1 indicator, which is life expectancy at birth. The second dimension is knowledge and is based on 2 indicators: expected years of schooling, that is for children of school entering age, and average years of schooling. And then there is a decent standard of living is the third dimension. Okay, and it is based on the indicator gross national income per capita. Okay, now what happens is, so you have 3 dimensions and 4 indicators. Now data on each indicator is converted into a normalized value, okay, And basically, how is it done? The ratio of the difference between actual value and minimum value to the difference between maximum value and minimum value is taken. So that should give rise to a value between 0 and 1. Now, the only qualification here is that gross national income values are not used directly. Instead, log of gross national income values are used so that increments in gross national income at a higher value of gross national income add smaller amounts to the indicator. Okay. Now, next slide, please. Okay. And here, I don't have much to say except that, in the first 4 lines, you look at, you can see the maximum and minimum values which have been used here for working out the normalized value of the indicators. But in regard to knowledge, as I told you, there are 2 indicators, expected years of schooling and average years of schooling. So in order to work out a normalized indicator for knowledge, we take the arithmetic mean of the 2 indicators. Okay. So, and once we've got one normalized value each for the 3 dimensions, we take a geometric mean of that to work out the Human Development Index. Okay. So I'm basically down to my last 2 slides. Let's go down to them. Next slide. Okay. So these are the actual figures. Okay. These are the actual figures. And I've basically got a panel. Okay. Here, there are 6 countries: India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, China, Myanmar, and Sri Lanka. Okay. And we look at 4 time periods: 1990, 2000, 2010, and 2021. And India starts off quite well at the 3rd rank in 1990. But in 2010, it gets overtaken by Bangladesh. Okay, I don't know what's happening now in Bangladesh, but in 2021, India was in 4th place here among these 6 countries, and Bangladesh was in 3rd place. Okay, and you can see that Sri Lanka is ranked 1st throughout, and China is ranked 2nd throughout. Bangladesh improves its position from 5th position, from 5th rank to to being ranked 3rd. Okay, and Myanmar also improves its ranking a little bit. Okay, Pakistan has, its rank has gone down from being ranked 4th to ranked 6th. But India's position has worsened. And in the last column of this table, I look at the net increase. Okay. And you see, in terms of the net increase from 1990 to 2021, India's rank is 4th. Okay. China, Bangladesh, Myanmar, okay, are ahead of India in terms of the net increase in the Human Development Index. Okay. And much of the damage has, in regard to the deterioration of ranking, has taken place after 2010. Last slide. Next slide. Okay, where I show you the inequality adjusted Human Development Index. This is basically your Human Development Index adjusted for income inequality. Okay, if incomes are all perfectly equal in the economy, the inequality adjusted human development index is equal to the normal human development index. But obviously it doesn't happen, incomes are not perfectly equal across the country. So the value that the inequality adjusted human development index takes are basically less than the values of the human development index. But in countries where the inequality has worsened a lot, the human development index is revised down drastically to arrive at the inequality adjusted human development index. Okay, and what do we have? We have 4 countries here. We don't have data for the other 2 countries. But as you can see, okay, India's ranking has again worsened from being number 2 out of 4 countries to being number 3. Okay. And Bangladesh's ranking has again improved. China is number 1. Now, in terms of net increase between 2010 and 2021, we see that India is in 2nd position. Okay, not that bad. And China is in 3rd position. It's probably because of the fact that income inequality has increased a lot in China. Okay. So they have, in terms of the inequality adjusted human development index, China's position has not improved a lot. Okay.
Parth, we are actually going out of the time frame. So
Yeah. Okay. I finished. Yeah. So that's basically, so one line. Okay. That India's record in regard to the human development index in recent years is not very good, and the ranking has deteriorated in the recent past.
No, just one question to you on all this is, what is the government response? They criticize the HDI, no? They say it's all cooked up, isn't it?
I don't know, I haven't looked at the government response, I haven't really
We'll talk
gone
about
into
it
that.
later at the
Yeah.
Yeah, fine.
Yeah, but this is pretty, because the data which are used in the in computation of the human development index are based on government data. It's not based on, something which is cooked up in the US.
Thank you very much. You have given us a detailed, it's like a lecture, in a class. Thank you very much. Thank you. So can we move to Pooja, please? Pooja? Yeah, go ahead. Frame, please.
Putting it on. So, good evening. I'm going to talk about food prices and policies this evening. And I'm going to talk about some developments in the world food commodity market before going to India, because India is now increasingly more integrated with the world markets. So what matters in the rest of the world matters for India, and what happens in India also matters for the rest of the world. And then I'll go to Indian food markets, and then review some drivers of food prices in the literature. Now, coming to world food commodity markets for this year, since we all know that after the war in Ukraine, food prices had gone up. So this is the Food and Agriculture Organizations, the international agency responsible for food data, and that showed that there was a spike in food prices in 2022, largely because of the war in Ukraine, because both Ukraine and Russia are major producers and exporters of grains such as wheat and maize, and also oil seeds sunflower oil is largely concentrated, production is concentrated in Ukraine and Russia. But then the world markets demonstrated, quite a lot of resilience. And after spiking, the food prices were back to, came down, declined pretty fast, and especially for cereals and even for all commodities. And so the world markets performed very well. Shortfalls from one area were made up by other regions of the world. So that's a long-term trend in world food commodity markets. But in 2024, what I want to just highlight is that there's an uptick in the overall food price index, which is led largely by vegetable oil prices. And that matters for India because India is a large net importer, and about 57% of domestic demand is met from imports. And of that, palm oil is a major component. And the increase in world vegetable oil prices have been led by palm oil prices. And even by commodity standards, commodity production and exports are highly concentrated. So about the top 3 producers were account for, upwards of 60% in a lot of commodities. And palm oil is concentrated, production is concentrated highly even by world commodity standards. And 90% of the production is in 3 countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. And India is importing a lot of palm oil. So so the global palm oil prices would pass through into the Indian food prices market. The food processing prices would increase. So that's just one thing to note. And the other thing in the vegetable oil markets is that although the largest component is for food production, for food consumption, but increasingly countries are allocating a lot of the oil towards biofuel production so there's an interlinkage with energy prices. So as fuel oil prices rise, there are mandates, government increases the mandates for utilization of food crops for ethanol and biodiesel production. So that impacts food prices as well. Now, however, if you look at the benchmark cereal prices, so this is one good news. I mean, the cereal prices have been subdued ever since the spike, have come down, and they remain stable after the spike. Of course, rice prices had not been affected by the Ukraine crisis because those countries were not directly responsible for rice markets, are not involved in rice markets. But rice prices became elevated remained elevated all through 2023 because of production, the weather effects of the El Nino adverse weather conditions, as well as the spike in input prices. The fertilizer prices had gone up, and the fertilization utilization was down. So the input prices impacted the rice prices. But now, there is, because of the good price response, so as the price went up, there was a supply response. Producers increased their plantings because of good prices in the market. And as of May, June 2024, the rice prices have now come down. And India is also partly responsible because its restrictions on rice exports, which it had imposed in 2023, have been sort of retracted. Now, so the world food commodity prices, apart from vegetable oil prices, are now reasonably stable. The last thing that I wanted to pick up as far as the world markets are concerned is that farmers, not only in India, but in the rest of the world, are also restive. And so there has been increasing farmer unrest. So reports of farmer unrest and episodes of farmer unrest have increased, particularly in Europe. And from the end of 2023 to 2024, farmer protest demonstrations have increased in Europe. And although there is very limited data on social unrest, but there is data from the armed conflict and event data. And then there is a new data set from the IMF on the reported social unrest index. And those show that farmer unrest indeed increased particularly in Europe during 2024. And there were different triggers. So part of the trigger in the entire, and the difference was that farmer unrest is not new on any continent, but this time the farmer unrest was spread all across Europe. And one of the reasons, there were several reasons for farmer protests, and they're different country by country. So for instance, in Poland and Hungary and Romania, the cheap imports from Ukraine, because Ukraine's normal shipping lines were disturbed. So the cheap imports from Ukraine of grain led to farmer protests in Poland, and farmers were out in full force with their tractors and demonstrations. Then in other countries in Europe, there were proposals for withdrawing tax exemptions to farmers for fuel uses, for diesel, and so those were so high input costs, fertilizer costs, and seed costs. And fuel costs led to a lot of protests in the entire continent. Then there were, like I said, cheap imports, and the proposed EU-Mercosur deal. So farmers are protesting against, freer trade agreements and liberalization and cheaper imports from other countries, whereas the European farmers have to, comply with a lot of standards. And then, of course, the European farmers were also complaining about the increasing environmental cost burdens that are being placed or proposed to be placed on them. So, farmer unrest became sort of continent-wide in Europe in 2024, partly. And the thing to note is that there was a swift political response from both the European Parliament and from country-level governments, administrations to this. And at the European level, tighter restrictions were placed on imports from Ukraine, and the EU also withdrew a new regulation that it was proposing on sustainable use of pesticides. So that was rolled back. And of course, in the countries, the restrictions on water usage and that were placed in Spain and Greece and other countries, and on tax exemptions for fuel, they were also retracted. So the governments backed off. So there are some common themes running across the farmer protests worldwide, including in Europe and in India as well. So the farmers are protesting against rising input costs and trade agreements, so deregulation, and as well as the increasing costs of compliance. So what this means is that, the farmer unrest across the world is suggesting that the agricultural markets are in need of a transition, and the future needs to be reimagined, and farmer interests are being sort of placed against the interests of the public health specialists and the environmentalists, climate activists, and animal welfare activists. And farmers across the world are protesting against these, conflict of interest with the other sort of agendas because, of the impact, the environmental impact and the health impact of food, the environmental impact of agriculture, and of course on livestock. So, so this suggests that there is a need for a very sort of global dialogue, because EU has rolled back its, regulations, and if that happens, then there is trouble. So there needs to be a global dialogue on that. Now, moving to so I just wanted to highlight that farmer unrest is not exclusive to India, but it's a global issue at the moment. Now, moving on to the state of the Indian food markets, what we have seen, in the recent years, as mentioned by even previous speakers, is that there's record production, right? So what the data from the government, the data coming from the government agencies is showing is that there's record level of production, and food grain output has grown in consecutive, like we have reached record levels during the last 8 years, and food grain production has hit a new high of 332 million tons in 23-24, and the favorable weather this year is likely to increase the output to a new record level next year. Now, what is the role of policy as far as this sort of record production? Because Indian agriculture had sort of achieved a lower level of variability in output during the end of 2000s, but now we are hitting record level of productions. We are increasing, and this is partly attributable to, according to the government, to production spreading to new areas because of location-specific seed varieties and expansion of irrigation facilities, as well as increase in procurement operations in newer or non-traditional states. Now, so as far as government policy is concerned, it seems to be directly connected. There seems to be a supply response coming out of the price policy that the government is announcing, and we have seen that minimum support prices have increased steadily, since the financial and food crisis of 2007-8. It was the MSPs were hiked substantially in some years, especially after the food crisis, and then again in 2010-11, and they have been increasing steadily over the last 7 years. And even this year, in October, the MSP for wheat was hiked by around 7%. So there's a steady increase in policy support, and there's a output response from that. And so it's not surprising that since the MSP acts as a floor to agriculture prices, the Indian wholesale market prices have also been increasing. And although after the new harvest come into the market, the prices decline. But in case of wheat, the prices have again picked up since August, September. They have picked up, and they are remaining elevated. So, and food inflation as such has become a major concern. Of course, it's in a lot of other areas, in vegetables and horticultural products. But wheat prices are continuing to rise. I just didn't get to update the data on rice, but we'll move to the next slide. So, like I said, that price policy and trade policy are being used very actively by the government of India to rein in food inflation. And the government had placed, since the rice prices were rising and there was a weather disruptions in the last season, the government had placed a lot of restrictions on exports of rice. India, of course, now is the largest exporter of rice. And before the restrictions, it accounted for around 40% of global rice exports. So export demand has become very, very important for Indian rice markets. And the rice prices also are rising as a result. But since the harvests were good across Asia and India in 2024, the government has removed the restrictions, and as the world prices have also come down. But the wheat restrictions continue because government is still grappling with the rise in prices of wheat, and it's there is a ban on export of wheat and wheat products, and government has placed and reduced several times the stock limits on traders, processors, and wholesalers. But the wheat prices in the domestic market continue to show an upward trend. So now, just in terms of concluding, there are a lot of the government has itself come out and said that since 2020, during 2020 and 2024, food inflation has become a big concern because it's become broad-based and it has remained persistent. So so it's a huge macroeconomic policy constraint. And now a lot of factors are responsible for price rises, food price inflation. And we know that, agriculture, the weather plays, so there are short-run factors, which includes weather disruptions. So that's a fundamental factor for agriculture yields. And any sort of, shock in the weather, drought, the adverse monsoon, or pests and diseases, and, that can have a adverse impact on production and then on prices as a result. And when there's an adverse, if the stocks of food are low already with the government, then that leads to market speculation, and so the it becomes the expectations of price rise become self-fulfilling. So the food and the wheat stocks were low, and that is probably one of the factors behind the rise in wheat prices in recent years, because the government stocks had been low and there was a weather disruption last year. Now, the increase in input prices, especially for fertilizers and seeds, because there's a lot of upstream and downstream concentration in agriculture markets, food markets. So the seed prices and fertilizer prices matter a lot, and in India, the agriculture wages, because of the post-NREGA increase in agriculture wages, has also been sort of underscored as a factor behind increasing agriculture prices, increasing agriculture costs and prices as such. So low rates of investment also, if you don't invest in high yielding and increasing the yield in sort of backward areas or the disadvantaged areas, that also plays a part. Now, the other factor that has been highlighted as far as the world and Indian food markets are concerned is the increase in per capita incomes and the change in dietary patterns. So a lot
of... Can you,
yes,
can we come to the conclusion, please?
Yes, just coming. And so that there is increasing demand for feed, and the government's biofuel policy is also leading to increased demand for diversion of food towards biofuel production. So that is also impacting food prices, because livestock products need much more food grains to produce livestock products than if there was direct consumption of grains, and so the biofuel mandates. So this is where I want to stop. And a lot of factors are playing in the market as far as food inflation is concerned. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we now go to the last presentation of Zakaria. Yeah. Multidimensional poverty.
Thank you. Thank you, Suhas. Can we get the slides up? So my presentation is basically in response to Niti Aayog's recent report on multidimensional poverty, where Niti Aayog has claimed that we have removed, or lifted 135 million people out of poverty. So we wanted to see whose poverty has actually reduced, and who are these 135 million people, and what proportion of different groups kind of form this reduction of poverty. So as the title suggests, this is an interrogation of social progressivity of multidimensional poverty reduction in India, meaning that what is different social groups share in reduction of poverty, depending on their minority status and all that. So, so as we want to move further, first of all, tracking multidimensional poverty becomes important in terms of longitudinal tractability, because after 2011-12 survey in NSS data, there is no consumption poverty estimation. And obviously, a lot of time has passed, so we need to have a data set that actually allows us to compare. So NFHS data, which is the part of the global demographic health survey data, actually has that possibility, because there are 3 rounds since early 2000s. So 2005-06, then we have 2015-16, and then we have 2019-21. Of course, there is a recent data that is available on consumption poverty that can be estimated from 2022-23 consumer expenditure survey, which was done by NSS, but it is completely incomparable given the changes in the way data has been collected. And there is no comparable, parallel survey, so that we can see how over time things have changed. So you can have a point of time estimate, but not over the time estimate. So as I told you, this is now doing data for social groups is not easy in India, because most of the time what we do is, when we track social groups, so we have this typical category:
ST, SC, OBC, and general category, which is supposed to be the numerator class or the most advantaged class. But then you have, within general class, a minority hidden into that, which is the Muslim group, which actually has very low average compared to the rest of the group. So it kind of reduces the inequality that you want to kind of see. And similarly, when you look at the social group-based inequality, when you want to see the religious group-based inequality, you have basically the two major groups, Muslims and Hindus. But then, within Hindus, there are social minorities that are included as part of that group, which is scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. So they kind of pull the average of the overall numerator class or the comparison group, and therefore you don't see the actual disparity that you would see normally. So what I have done in this comparison is that we have actually bifurcated the OBC group, which is the other backward class group, and general group into religious groups so that we can clearly see the minority groups. And these are the ratios of population for different groups so that you have an idea about. So this is from the 2019-2021 survey. And then you have the census comparison of that. Of course, OBC data is not available from census, so we have put it from NSS 2004-5, which is kind of comparison group. So, of course, these are the 3 rounds that we will be tracking, 2005-6. Then after that, there is one decade, 2015-16 and 1921. Niti Aayog has been producing estimates on multidimensional poverty with slight difference in methodologies. They have just changed indicator, but numbers don't change much. What I have used is typically the UNDP method and as it is method as well as indicators. So it is, my numbers are comparable internationally, not strictly comparable with Niti Aayog, but if you look at the numbers, they are quite similar. So methodology wise, not comparable, but in absolute sense, when you compare the numbers, they are comparable. Okay, so thanks to Siddharth's presentation, it's just a matter of Human Development Index converted into a national level estimates for poverty. So we are here looking at not at achievement but deprivations. So it is just a mirror image of what Siddharth presented. So these are also having 3 dimensions: health, education, and standard of living. And in health, we have 2 sort of indicators: nutrition and mortality. In education, we have 2 indicators: years of schooling and school attendance. And in standard of living, we have 6 indicators of different standard of living, basically stock variables of different kind of accesses. And all these together, so if you are deprived in almost every indicator, then your score would be 1. So that is the maximum score. And if you are not deprived in any of these indicators, your score would be 0. Now, if you are deprived something like 0.33 or more, you are poor. You are given a score 1 because you are poor. And if you are not deprived, of course, you are given a score 1. And if you are deprived even further, so more than 0.33, so your depth of poverty is, more than poverty line. So that is, so as I told you, the first 2 dimensions, health and education, since they have only 2 indicators, so they get, because there are 3 dimensions, so 1 by 3 multiplied by half, so that each of them get 1 by 6 weight. And for the standard of living indicators, they get the weight of 1 by 18 because there are 6 indicators that has to be divided by 3. So, I've already told you. So, so this is the main result of my analysis that I have done. And this is along with one of my co-author, Akash Arora, who is working at IMT Ghaziabad. And, interesting thing to see is that the reduction rate on the last column of poverty is highest for the most advantageous class, which is, general Hindus. there is a row repeated for general Muslims. Don't worry about that. So now, and the good or the notable point is that they started with the lowest level of poverty and they reduced their poverty as fastest. On the other hand, ST group that started with the highest level of poverty reduced their poverty slowest. So it is clearly a regressive poverty reduction policy. So those groups that needed to reduce fastest, they reduced slowest, and those groups that needed to reduce little bit in comparison to those groups, they reduced fastest. So again, look at the actual prevalence numbers. So numerator class, that is general Hindus, had the poverty in 2004-5, the starting point when we started the race is 31%. Now, when do these groups, the social minorities, achieve this 30% mark? So SCs, OBC Muslims, general Muslims, they achieve the mark after a decade's progress. So wherever the general Hindus were there, the minorities or social minorities achieved that after a decade or so. And STs, they are 15 years behind. So it's a 15 years of lag of development in terms of poverty reduction. So the point is that, of course, things in absolute sense may look like it is improving, but the social gaps are not reducing. So the question is, what about the all the programs and the fiscal policies that we run? So this is about the likelihood of being a poor if you are from a different social group. So the red line is actually the line of parity. So you are as good as national average. But when you look at the different social group, STs, who started off with much higher prevalence of poverty compared to the population group, general population, they further become worse. On the other hand, the group which is starting at a much better position, which is the general Hindus, they become even better. The only minority group that crossed the line of ratio 1 and reduced its poverty burden is OBC Hindus, and perhaps because of their political presence in the parliaments and everything has increased. So perhaps that has helped in negotiating some of the resources for poverty reduction programs for that group. This is quite an interesting graph, but you won't be able to read it unless I help you. So the x-axis is actual level of poverty, prevalence level of poverty. On the y-axis, we have actual intensity of those who are poor. So the score has to be above 0.33. So the red dots on top, they are actually 2005-6 situation for different social groups. And the green dots are for 2015-16, and the blue dots are actually for latest 2019-21. So as you can see, the STs, the blue, square at the bottom is in line with the previous years or previous data's Muslim OBC, Muslim general, and SCs. So the thing is that even though poverty levels are same, it are actually at a different point of time. And even if the poverty levels are same, the intensity faced by different minorities are quite intense. For Muslims, generally it is higher for compared to SCs, even though their prevalence rates are quite similar. So in a sense, Muslims are relatively more poorer than SCs. So these are directly readable. So these are actually, these numbers are broken into components, like what factors actually, or what dimensions actually make you poor. So if you add up, that will become the total prevalence of the poverty for that group in different years. So you can see the SOL, or standard of living, was the highest factor for the poverty to start with. But as we kind of moved in time, the standard of living deprivation has actually reduced. And that is the reason why we see a lot of reduction in poverty, because they actually form 0.33 or 1/3 of the total weight in the poverty. And it is very easy to reduce this kind of poverty because these are stock variable like access to drinking water, electricity. It doesn't talk much about the quality, right? These are 0, 1 variables, so it is easy to move. So they have moved, and that's why we see. But if you look at the education deprivation and health deprivation, they are not that easy to reduce. And for Muslims, particularly education has been a challenge. And these are different indicators broken into those dimensions, broken into different indicators in in relative shares context. So you can see the nutrition becomes the biggest challenge for India, for almost all group, but it is more so in case of general Hindus and OBC Hindus, but it is more or less and schooling is a major challenge, and that is particularly more pronounced for Muslims. So this is just a similar representation of the previous graph, just to see that it's, the radar actually looks so much bigger for STs. That means it is really very clear that STs need to be a problem of poverty among STs need to be, addressed. And the burden of poverty over time is actually increasing on them because their reduction of poverty is slowest, but they had the highest level of poverty to start with. So these are like control. I just wanted to see how these groups are significant even when we run with control variables. So adjusted for female-headed household, urban, rural differences, and head of the household's age. Even then, you can clearly see the social hierarchy actually remains quite stable because these are additional, deprivations that you will earn if you follow different, if you are in different social groups. So for scheduled tribes, the deprivation score is highest. As we go for different other minorities, OBCs and scheduled caste, it kind of around 0.6 and 0.5, but for STs, it is quite high. Again, we have this aspirational district program about which I spoke last year, so I'm not going to speak much, but these are 112 districts which are lagging behind districts for which government has a special sort of data collection program at district level and all that. And you can clearly see that I can't compare 2004, 5-6 in here because district level data was not possible for 2005-6, so only 15-16 and the latest round of data. So you can clearly see from this table that that reduction of poverty, right, is more progressive in non-ADP districts where attention is less. And ADP district, it is less progressive or sort of regressive, more regressive in ADP district where attention is very high, which means that once the resources are available at a special level, then the distribution of that resource depends on the local power structures, and that does not allow the resources to move to those who are actually in need of those resources. So, so this is what I want to say is that accumulated learning shows us that available resources at any level, at any regional level you want to, is graded by the social and political power enjoyed by the different social group within the region. Locally powerful social groups are able to channel the economic benefits to themselves through upper hand over the local structures of the government and, further disadvantaging the minority groups. So, do I have time? Yeah. Okay, so so there is why there is a lack of social progressivity. There are several reasons for this. One is that our growth policies look at maximizing growth, but doesn't have semblance with the social policy that we need to pursue given the level of poverty we have. And the field-based studies are very, very clearly showing, the qualitative study shows that most of these development policies actually produce a lot of displaced people in our society through all the, because most of the STs that where the poverty is highest get displaced because their areas or their livelihoods get affected by these development projects. So, and then there is this historical disadvantage because of the institutional problem that was created because of the colonial legacy of the land tenure system, which I have talked last year. So you can refer to that. But the thing is that this is also reflecting the aspirational district. So you see the result of less progressivity in ADP district is also because of that. And the final and important factor is that what are we doing now? What we are doing now is that we are allocating these budget amounts to different sub-plans or National Development Action Plan for SCs and STs, which is a kind of provision by the law, actually is not evaluated by CHE properly, like how this budget was allocated. And therefore, there is no accountability whether whatever money that is being said by the government that we spend for SCs and we spend for STs, and also for other minorities is not properly accounted. So, so what can be the corrective measures? So we need to not only recognize the spatial disadvantage, but we also need to recognize the social group based disadvantage. Because once you are in a region, then distribution of resources depends on the power. So to neutralize that distribution of resources according to power, you need to entitle people with lower power. And that requires some sort of entitlement for the social group as well. So, and these policies current policies have nothing inbuilt in the scope. So if you look at multidimensional poverty, most of the attention goes to regional district level kind of thinking, but not at the group level, social group level kind of thinking. So, yeah, so, and then given that caste is such an important factor, and we know that the social groups disadvantages are more entrenched in our society, we need to make that as the first unit of analysis rather than region. Thank you.
Thank you for that insightful presentation. Now we open it to Q&A. I just wanted to ask the panel just quickly about what is the government response to the HDI? They criticize the whole thing, or what is the...
HDI is a much more sort of long established index. So that's not
Hunger index.
Hunger index is where hunger, and there are other indices which the government has been contesting.
Yeah.
Not really HDI.
Okay. Yeah. We'll just take 3 questions first. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well,
Gautam, come up.
Let me first of all congratulate all the speakers. It has been an excellent presentation by each one of them. But it gave me a kind of impression that we are in an era of thoughtlessness in a macroeconomic policy. You take any indicator, you can take human development indicator, you take agriculture indicator, you take poverty after the Andekar thing, and you take the macroeconomic, except for the inflation management FRBM area. But we have not applied the thought after, particularly, I believe, 2010 or even 2000, started with the 2000 or so. It matured in 2010 and it is progressing at a very high rate in 2024. So this is a situation which is macroeconomic indicator, any indicator which you talked about. How do we take the country forward in the next few years? Talking of 25 years, as you see in economy, said it's all in all long term, we all are dead. So that sort of a scenario is not acceptable. But what do you think that this is going to be taking in this, any change which we are expecting shortly in 5 years or so or not? Secondly, we started with the Rajiv Gandhi mission, oil mission, etc. What has happened to that oil mission period during that period and etc. And lastly, that finance matters and the particularly how the repo rate is being decided is a kind of a logic behind it, or it is becoming illogical things happening and not really linking the indicator, influencing the vast economic indicator, like you take the international trade, you take employment situation is very bad, educate employment situation is still bad. And that was a very productive age group of 18 to 24. It's a very situation very bad. So where are we taking the Indian economy in this scenario? And what is the political economic thought behind this?
Yeah, thank you. Gautam?
I just have one question.
Sorry? Hold on.
Can I pose my question? Excuse me.
Taking up this question.
Excuse me. Yeah, I have two small questions.
So have I. I'm just raising it with the gentleman.
Okay.
Yeah, you just called my name, therefore I was taking the point. Zakaria, I didn't get the impression from your talk, very subtle variations of who's benefiting or not benefiting. Has the poverty level declined?
Yeah, of course.
How much? What is it now?
Can we talk that and answer that?
Yeah, sorry.
No, but it's not, 25 से 23 हो गया कितना? I mean, is it substantial? We are now the fastest growing economy, fifth largest, etc., but poverty levels are amazing. And is it still 25%?
Yeah, go ahead. Just identify yourself, please.
I'm G.K. Babu. I'm a retired civil servant. I have worked in the Ministry of Commerce for 7 years and Defense for 7 years. I have two fundamental questions. Number one, we are at $3.7 trillion today GDP. And every day there is an announcement of reaching 30 trillion, 40 trillion, 50 trillion by 2047. Now, I want to understand the arithmetic behind reaching from 3.7 trillion today to the 30 trillion official target and the 50 trillion which Mr. Subramaniam from IMF talks about, number one. Number two, with artificial intelligence, with drone technology, we are doing enormous work in terms of crop surveillance, in terms of spraying of insecticides, reaching seeds, fertilizers to the farmers. And as the lady said, we reached 332 million tons of food grains. My question is, the Pulsive mission and the oilseeds mission existed when I was a deputy commissioner in 1989-90. 35 years ago. We are still importing $3 billion of pulses and $17 billion of edible oil. What has happened to agriculture with respect to these two main items? Because I don't see any other problem in the field of agriculture today. Thank you.
We pick up two more. Yeah. No, come up with the mic. You're old. No, you're not audible. Then identify yourself.
I'm Siddhartha. I cover Indian economy. My question is to Mr.
Mention your paper.
I work with Bloomberg.
Yeah.
So my question is to Mr. Vikas and Ms. Pooja, because she's mentioning about the data and you're questioning the data. So what can you, do you accept that?
Yeah, Professor Partha, if we go back to 1700, Indian economy was contributing to world economy 24%. Now in 1950 has come to 42%. And it is growing because of inequality. In agriculture, there is less inequality. In manufacturing, more. And if you go to the service sector, this difference is growing very fast. And now rich is becoming richer and poor is becoming poor. The way GDP is said to be a third or fifth economy. But at the same time, we take per capita, India is 140th or 125th. So how to fill this gap between inequality? Thank you.
This year, at the time of Rabi sowing, the availability of DAP was 55% short of the level of DAP availability in 2019. That was before the fertilizer crisis started. Now, do you really want me to believe that with 55% shortage of fertilizer, there's no impact on production? And we just keep having high rises in growth? You see, I mean, what are we talking about? I mean, we have been facing major crisis of fertilizer availability for last 3 years. Okay, these are official government numbers. Okay, it seems to have no impact on production. Now, I mean, either farmers are fools or somebody is just cooking up the evidence. So I really suspect the numbers on agricultural production. Sorry, what is that? Well, we have to question the numbers. And, this is just, agricultural numbers on agricultural production, record production every year are being thrown at us to cover the fact that economic growth is much worse than the total aggregate numbers are, the official aggregate numbers show. Thank you.
Yeah, so sorry. The arithmetic behind these numbers, look, I mean, firstly, we have the problem that, we have one great advantage when you talk about the size of the Indian economy, which is the size of the Indian population. So any figure you take, when you look at it in aggregate terms, of course, India appears very big in the world. Okay. But as soon as you go to per capita terms, the position changes dramatically. So all this talk about reaching this figure, figures can be reached in various ways. Figures can be reached by increasing prices. Okay, you can increase GDP like that. It's an empty kind of slogan which doesn't really address the real questions that are there in the economy. As far as the question of the repo rate is concerned, I think Parth's presentation began with that. It's part of this whole idea that macro policy is basically about managing inflation. So they are fixing their repo rate by looking at a particular price index and anticipations about what the inflation rate is likely to be. So they have a target rate. So they are looking at basically the consumer price index. The inflation rate based on the consumer price index is very different from what your GDP calculations are showing. Now, I am not saying that it's a conspiracy, but there is obviously some issue. Why is there any reluctance to investigate why this difference is coming in the GDP inflation rate? Because if that is changed, then it makes a huge difference to what your real GDP growth is. So that's the issue I was posing. And if that is your real GDP growth and 1.4% is the real inflation rate, why is the RBI looking at some other inflation rate and keeping the repo rate so high? So there is obviously a problem in those inflation numbers, which are affecting the growth numbers also.
The thrust of my argument was to say that India is a very diverse economy. There are very poor people and there are very rich people. And, I always go back to the fact when I was growing up, there were a lot of Lohiites who would say to me that, look, you are English speaking, you talk about class, but there is an India and a Bharat. Of course, now everything is Bharat, but there was an India and a Bharat. So I am simply saying that, macroeconomics cannot be aggregated only to talk about the aggregate level, which is India plus Bharat. We have to have disaggregated this thing because Bharat is doing very poorly. Okay, so that's the first point. And the second point is that,
enclavization of economy, where you find just the Bharat and India. India is becoming enclavization, and then this is becoming this.
Absolutely. So, if you take in recent times, not immediately, preceding this discussion, after COVID, the corporate sector was booming, whereas the rest of the economy was, there was movement away from the cities into the villages. So there is some basic problem there. And in addition to what Surajit said, I think the problem is also that we can tom-tom the fact that we will become a 5 trillion economy. And then you go to COP29 of climate change, and they say that, okay, why don't you improve your technology? Why not get rid of coal and all? Then we say we are a poor economy. You can't have it both ways. Huh? You have to make up your mind. Are you concentrating on per capita or are you concentrating on 5 trillion?
Yeah. I think there was this question about reduction of poverty.
difference, difference between the multimodal poverty reduction definition adopted by the Niti Aayog and the international definition. There's a vast difference between, and if you find that by opening the Jan Dhan account of 200 crore and adding to that, it leads to a kind of multimodal. There's an international definition on the multimodal poverty.
I'll respond to that question and it will form a part of the answer that you have. So, yes, I mean, the way currently the formula that you have for multidimensional poverty, we have reduced from 55% to 16% in aggregate. Yeah. Over a period of this 2005-6 to no, we were at 55% level of poverty in aggregate. The 31% was for the most advantageous class, which is general Hindus, right? So we have reduced, but it all depends on what the benchmark you are drawing, right? So what your, like, for example, if you say that, we want everybody to cross at least 10 years of education and then only that person should be considered not deprived. Then your 6 year of education currently what you have is going to increase poverty like massively, right? So it all depends on where you have drawn your line and what you are measuring. But I mean,
education indicator also you cannot take it as it is because if it has some kind of that's a separate debate. If you take it the per capita income indicator or the health or endowment, that's it. Can you press the key? We have to close up. This was a part of investigation angle. I'm not interested. Press the key. What you want to ask?
Education, health, I agree, these are relevant factors. But how many people in India are still going hungry after we are the fastest growing economy in the world? This is the dichotomy. Iski baat bataiye.
I mean, this multidimensional poverty will not answer that question because you need to go to the consumption poverty. You need to find how many people are actually not eating enough. And
no figures are available.
I mean, there is a possibility of getting the figures now.
Economist gang, yeah. I mean, if they don't have the figures, how can you get it? You guys are the smart guys and you are not giving the answer.
Pull it, please. Pull it.
No.
There's no gap.
I cannot give you the right of the head. I don't have that number, but the numbers are not small. Okay, numbers are not small. Those people who can't have enough calories, these numbers are not small. But what I'm trying to say is that when you are talking about a reduction in multidimensional poverty, your policies, your almost every anti-poverty policy is focused towards those people who need it the most. At least you claim that, right? So then it should reflect in the social progressivity of the numbers of reduction. But we don't see that. We see that the advantageous group continues to have the advantage of reduction in poverty and the most disadvantaged group continues to have that disadvantage. So we are moving like a parallel, different social groups are changing, but they are changing like a train track. So we are moving, but we are moving like a train track. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, Pooja, can you answer that pulses and yeah? Can you pick up the mic, please? Pick up the mic. Yeah. Doesn't matter. Yeah. We're not monitoring people coming and going. Yeah.
So, I just wanted to say about pulses and vegetables oils is that it's clear that, the domestic demand is far exceeds the Indian supply. And so, but the pulses mission and oilseeds mission has been there for a long period, but it's, pulses and oilseed production is concentrated in specific states. So, there's a region-wise concentration of production. And these are in rain-fed areas. And the pulses market are amazing because you don't even have benchmark prices. So even sometimes when we do, we want to compare domestic prices with international prices, there are no world benchmark prices.
No, he was more on importing so much. We are not increasing the production.
Yeah, we are not increasing. Despite the missions being there, we are not increasing because obviously, there is, the pulses production is concentrated state-wise and there is no, so the technology missions have not enabled.
No, this is a policy failure.
Policy failure. It's technology and policy failure both.
Yeah.
So one more question.
Just 1 second.
So can I ask one more?
No, you can't. Sorry. No, we close now. We're closing. You see, the point which the gentleman raised is, Pooja, you have to answer that you are quoting the government figures, and Vikas says they're all fudged. So, I mean, what are you building on then?
So, yeah, that is my problem. So that is a problem, that if you don't trust the data sources, but if what other data will I present? If I don't present the government of India data, what other, I mean, international agencies source data from the government of India. So they are presenting in government of India data. So what data am I supposed to present, sir? So I don't trust the data myself, but what choice do, people have?
No, we will close. Is there anybody from this side? We close? Okay. Yeah. So basically, for the past 10 years, we've been at this. And one thing which comes out, I mean, Gautam asked that question about the poverty. Now the point is, if you don't have the consumption poverty data, then how can you? It stopped in 2012. This is all deliberate. I mean, there's no question about it. You see. So you call this gang of economists, they are being pushed on the wall, obviously, because how can you work without data? So I mean, the whole, and Surajit, everybody here, and Partha said you have to relearn economics now, according to whoever, but that's not the point, So we are heading towards, it's like unguided missile. You don't know where it's going to hit. It's absolutely. And the poor are going to suffer. There's no doubt about it. They're at the lowest end. I mean, what the other thing is, what Zach has pointed out, that the minorities are suffering the most. That's another point. So, and then a majoritarian regime is not bothered about the minorities. That also comes out very clearly. I'm not saying that. Please. Don't put words in my. So anyway, you don't interject like this, please. Don't interject. Sorry, don't interject, please. So anyway, thank you very much. It's been a very patient audience, and thanks to the panel, we've gone ahead with the. Sorry,
to ask a small question.
What is it?
Yeah, actually, China is calling itself a developing country still, though it has become a developed country. It has 5 times more GDP than India, and it is for all practical purposes a developed country. But just to take advantage of international policies and IMF and World Bank policies for being classified as developed,
has to be called a developing country. We'll always remain a developing country.
No, but India is aspiring to become a developed country and call itself a Viksit Bharat. So it may, be counterproductive if we call it, we are classified as a developing country because of the international policies which give benefit to being classified as a developing country.
It's a non-question. Anyway, I think it's a non-question.
No, there's a standard classification that the World Bank has. India is midway in lower middle income. China is upper middle income. And there are high income economies which are above that category. India graduated from low income to lower middle income in 2007.
I just wanted
it's still
to know
only halfway to upper middle income.
A reference was made to GNI, gross national income. So I just wanted to ask if it is different from GDP, gross domestic product, or is it the same? And secondly, what is PURA?
One is a measure of production, one is a measure of income. The two are related. Okay, the two are related and roughly would tend to move in the similar direction. And the high income, upper middle income, low middle income status I'm talking about is based on per capita GNI.
What is PURA? A reference was made to it in one of the presentations of one of the panelists.
That was made by.
That is providing urban amenities in rural areas. That was what President Kalam has suggested.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so we can close now. Thank you very much.
Convener.